is an 18
Oh,
year.
yes.
Thank you guys.
All right. So, today we're going to be talking about how to write good parental figures for your characters so that way you don't have to just kill them off.
Or
Um,
make them very abusive.
Yeah, or make them very abusive. Because that's generally what people do, right? They either make the parents super abusive, so it's like they ran away from home, no more problems, don't have to write a parent anymore. Or they alternatively say they were super awesome parent, but they've been kidnapped, killed, etc. Um, somehow removed. And I get it. It's easier, especially when you've never been a parent before, and maybe some of you don't get along with your parents very well. And so as a result, you're like, writing parents is hard. I don't know how to do this. And you don't want to just write them exactly like your parents because then that's awkward. So, first of all, we're gonna say this is an obvious one, but it's a one that's necessary. Avoid stereotypes. I know there are a lot of people who are helicopter parents, but you can make someone be a helicopter parent as a character without like making it just super stereotypical. It's like with cheerleader. You can have a cheerleader character that isn't just the classic like woohoo like teen drama, like you don't have to make them the stereotype. You can use those types of traits, but typically those types of traits need to be buried in other things. For example, next thing being how did their own upbringing shape how they parent? Shape whether or not they even want to be a parent. Shape whether they're just about being a parent. Um, a great example of this, and I know it's a solidly PG-13 show, so maybe you guys will or won't want to watch it. So don't necessarily have to watch this, but I'm going to spoil things. Um, so there's a TV show called Supernatural, and there is actually a character who kind of semi-adopted these two kids. Not formally adopted because they had their own dad, but their dad was kind of MIA a lot of the time. Their own dad had been thoroughly traumatized because their mom died when they were really young, attacked by a monster. And so he's out attacking monsters all the time. And it's like, good job attacking monsters so other families don't have problems, but now your poor children are left by themselves. And so that's a great example of, for example, how, well, wow, I'm saying for example, of how a parent can go from being like a really supportive, good parent to becoming kind of a terrible parent because of bad traumas and different things like that. He wasn't trying to be a bad parent. He genuinely really cared about his kids, but he thought the only way to keep them safe was to continue to kill monsters and leave them alone 99% of the time. um, with that being said, the person that I was talking about, Bobby, he kind of semi adopted these kids because he's friends with their dad. And so he kind of helped take care of them all the time. Because even though he was a monster hunter, he was a lot more the intellectual monster hunter. He was the one that people would call and be like, yo, I don't know how to kill this random thing. And he'd be like, I got you a whole book on this random thing. But he never actually had his own kids because he had been told several times by his abusive father as a child, you break everything you touch. And so he thought if he had kids, he would break them. He would mess it up. And so he was very traumatized by that, but he ended up being such a great father figure because he was able to move beyond it and see all the things that his dad did that he didn't want to have happen and avoid them. And so his own upbringing not only shaped who he was, but it shaped how he ended up parenting these adoptive kids of his. Um, Speaking of which, the next thing, how does their fears shape how they parent? In his case, scared of being a bad parent that a lot of the times he would just only focus on trying to be like the good parent. The other dad would be like, hey, can you go teach my kids how to hunt monsters? And he'd be like, instead, we're going camping. And so, like, he was trying to just give them a normal, wholesome childhood because that's what he wanted. Um, and very much so, that shapes how people parent. If someone has a sibling die when they're young, they're way more likely to be a helicopter parent because of the fact that they saw how traumatizing that can be and don't want that to happen to them. If whereas if they had a perfectly fine childhood growing up, they might be a little bit less of a helicopter parent. Or if their parents just let them run wild and free and that worked out okay, they're probably going to let their children run wild and free and think that's okay. Not that that isn't okay. It's more just that everyone does things differently. But make sure you allow for flaws with them. What do their fears and their upbringings bring up in flaws in them? Are they too touchy about certain subjects? Are they a little too judgmental? Are they very much kind of like pushy about like you X, Y, and Z because I didn't do X, Y, and Z, and now look, and I think that's why I'm this way in life, or different things like that. Make sure that you're aware of these things because they're trying to do what's best for their kids. But unfortunately, sometimes in the name of trying to do what's best, parents end up causing more problems. It's just part of being human. So allow for them to be flawed. A lot of people just write their parents as these perfect entities in their novels, and that's not really how that works. We all know parents make mistakes because they're people too. Um, all right, next thing. What do they connect over or not connect over with their child? And how does that make that relationship either better or worse? Are they like, oh my gosh, we both love sports. Let's go play sports together. Or are they like, oh my gosh, I'm a book nerd and they love sports. I know nothing about football. Like, that could cause a lot of friction where they're like trying to be supportive, but they have no idea what's happening. They're like, woo, touchdown. I don't actually know what that was, but I'm going to pretend it was a touchdown. Are they very supportive like that, or are they like, can you read more books so I can relate to you because I don't get that? How do they attempt to connect with them? Are they just going to try and support whatever their kid does, or are they going to try and see if they can find a middle ground of some sort? And there's nothing wrong with either method. It's just that they're going to show off very different parts of the parent. Also, what are things they don't connect with that maybe are due to fears and things like that? For example, there are a lot of parents out there that, unfortunately, speaking of which, I'm glad none of y'all seem to have this problem, but a lot of parents out there that I've run into people that are like, yeah, the reason I didn't get into writing until I was like later in life is because my parents basically said, like, that's dumb. And why do they do that? Well, either A, because they're terrified that they're not going to make it as a writer, and therefore they're like, if I just tell them it's dumb, they won't become a writer and they won't starve to death. Or alternatively, sometimes they're like, hey, I'm like just worried that they think that they can do all this fancy stuff and be like J.K. Rowling, but their writing isn't currently like J.K., so they're not going to get there. And it's like, well, but writing takes practice, writing takes time. And so different kind of mental thought processes can cause parents to do different things, whether for or against being supportive. I know that I was very lucky, and I had parents who were incredibly supportive of my hopes and dreams to become a writer or something writing related. Um, and they were very much like, yeah, go do the thing. I believe in you. Um, but not all parents are like that, but that doesn't make them bad parents per se. Do I think it's important to support your child no matter what they want to do? 110%. But sometimes the reason why they don't support it is a good reason, even if them not supporting it is bad. And it's important to realize that with your parental characters. Sometimes they are going to say or do dumb things that are rude and mean and maybe even borderline sound abusive, but they're doing it because they think they're protecting their kid. And it doesn't make it okay, but like I said, we're flawed human beings. It's gonna happen. It's like when you say dumb stuff to your friend and you're like, oh my gosh, I did not mean that at all. I'm so sorry. Like, it happens, right? And so it's gonna happen one day with your kids if you decide to have kids too. It's just part of life, unfortunately. But um, it's important to show that complexity of character. It's important that you don't just immediately be like, they don't support their kid, therefore they're a horrible person. It's important to be like, okay, they don't support their kid. Why don't they support their kid? Going back to the supernatural example, their dad actually was very unsupportive of the younger brother, because there's two brothers, going to college and going to law school. Why? It wasn't because he didn't want him to go to college. He thought it was cool that he wanted to go to college, but he was terrified that he was going to go off to college, forget everything that he'd learned about killing monsters, and then get killed by one. Because a lot of people, once monsters know you exist and know that you are aware of them, they want to kill you before you kill them. Because if you're unaware and ignorant of the monster population, they're like, who cares? But if you know that they exist, you could potentially expose them. And so they want to kill you. And so it wasn't that he didn't support his dream of going to college, it was that he didn't support the idea of just going to college and completely abandoning being a monster hunter because that was dangerous. That was scary. He could die. Um, And so he seemed like a very like unloving, unsupportive dad. And yet in reality, it was just, I don't want you to die. And that's a very reasonable thing to not want. And so it's important that you show those complexities. I loved how later on in the series they showed the fact that he's like, did you know that he checked on you every day that you were in college? Like every time that he was in town at your college, he would drive by your dormitory, make sure you were okay. Like he may not have called you, he may not have talked to you, but he was there, whether you knew or not. He cared. And so it's important you show that parents can be two things. They can be harsh, they can be tough, but they can also be incredibly loving and supportive. And not, yes, there are abusive, horrible parents out there. Yes, there are parents that seem borderline perfect because somehow they've got all their crap together. But generally, they fall somewhere in the gray area middle where they struggle with being super supportive in certain areas and they struggle with being a great parent sometimes, but they're doing their darndest to try and support. All right. Speaking of which, talking about productive conflict. Conflicting with a child often comes because of people caring, which sounds dumb, but it's true. Oftentimes, you'll probably notice the same thing happens with anyone that you fight with, whether it's your parents, your siblings, or your friends, is that you're often end up in conflict not because you hate the other person, not because they're horrible. I mean, sometimes that can happen, but the majority of fights happen because you care, and therefore it hurts your feelings more when they hurt you because you care about them. If they were just some random stranger who was like, haha, you're dumb, you'd be like, whatever. But if they're your sibling, you're like, that hurt. Like, I care about you, therefore it hurts more. It stings more. And so when I say productive conflict, I mean talking about those emotions that people don't talk about with anyone else. How much do they trust their parents? Is there conflict? Is there productive conflict over their parent being like, I desperately want you to talk to me, but you keep everything to yourself for some reason? Or is it productive conflict because they're like, you tell me about everything in your life, and so far the choices you're making aren't very smart, or different things like that. Like, what type of productive conflict can they have with their parents that illustrates even more what kind of parent they are? Because you can be an incredibly supportive parent and still be like, that's not a good idea. um, and that can cause conflict, especially when they start to get into your guys' age of teenagers, because you guys want to be seen as adults, right? You're like, I'm capable, I'm confident, I can do things. And yet a lot of times the parents are still like, I'm worried, I'm panicked, understandably so, but still, it's hard. That productive conflict of I want to be adult, and of parents being like, no, please don't run away, and like try to be adults because you're not ready yet. And so kind of that fear of you getting hurt makes it so sometimes there's conflict there because you want to be able to just fly free, but they want to be able to help you. Yes.
I'm sorry, I immediately thought of different strokes F and S.
Yes. No, you're right though. You're right though. They actually are a great example of parental figures because of the fact that he's constantly being like, I want to take care of you because you're my little girl, but she's like, Dad, I'm literally an adult. Like, stop. And so there can be a lot of conversations like that, especially because as a parent, it's really hard to realize that your kid is mostly independent now. That is not an easy thing to deal with. And a lot of parents deal with it a lot better if they have younger siblings. But if you are the last sibling, if you are the youngest sibling, they're going to have the hardest time ever because they're like, oh my gosh, my small baby is not small baby anymore. And that's going to cause conflict. So it's important you introduce that with your characters too. If they are a teenager who's like, I got this, show that their parents care by having them be like, are you sure you got this? And then being like, Mom, really? Of course I do. And it's like, it's not that I don't believe in you, it's that I care about you so much that I don't want you getting hurt. All right, last thing that we're going to talk about is motivations in life and goals outside of being a parent. Because I think the other issue that people run into when they write parents is they write them like their only dream in life is being a parent. And some people, that is the case. All they want in life is to become a parent. But 99% of the population, that's not actually true. They had other dreams and aspirations, and then they decided to have kids, and that having kids was part of their dream, not their whole entire dream. Um, with that being said, make sure that you also show them being their own person, whether it's showing that they are painting more often now that they have more time, or whether you show that in the moments when they're not doing laundry and stuff like that, they're listening to music and aspiring to maybe compose their own music one day or something like that. Or maybe the kid comes home at some point and their parent is playing the violin, and the kid's like, I didn't even know you played the violin, and they're like, well, I haven't had much time to, or different things like that. Like, show that they have their own life, because a lot of times people just are like, they are parent, that is only job and goal in life, that is your sole purpose as a character. And you can have a parental figure or a parent in your novel that that isn't their sole goal, that isn't their purpose in life. That is part of their purpose in life, but there are other things to them. For example, I plan to have kids one day, but that is definitely not like my sole only dream in life. My other dreams in life, including continuing to progress my editing business, continuing to progress my art business, maybe even writing a novel one day, who knows. Can't seem to get past chapter 4. It's hard. I keep being like, "Ooh, new idea," and no, stick to the old one. Go back. Um, and so there are other goals that I have and that I will still strive for even after I have kids. And it's important that you write your parents in your novel the same way, that you show that they have other dreams, other aspirations. Um, and how do they try to achieve those aspirations within their limits? Because it's hard being a parent. It takes a lot of time and a lot of energy, but that doesn't mean that you can't try to reach for those other goals. All right, now it's time for any questions you have about writing guardians slash parental figures. Good, good. You feel like I did a decent job? Cool. Yay, I like it. I like it when I do a decent job. All right. Last thing for the video before I shut it off, just as a reminder for those of you who only watch via YouTube, and for you guys out loud, because it's good to remind you guys, we do have a writing contest currently. It is due on February 28th. Keep in mind that it is due on February 28th, yes, but also it is due before we close, so 3:45 at the absolute latest. If you call me, I will allow you to turn it in either via email or to turn it in by 4, but no later than 4 because I gotta leave too. I gotta go home. So, as a result, February 28th is that deadline. Reminder, the prompt is write a romance story that takes place during January/December holiday. You can make up your own fantasy holiday, your own sci-fi holiday. You can use an ancient holiday. Feel free to not just use like Christmas or different things like that. Like, yes, Christmas is awesome. Yes, New Year's is awesome. Love that. Happy to do that. If you want to do it and that's all you are feeling, go for it. But at the same time, I would also love to see some unique and original stuff. It'd be fun. Um, and with that being said, we also did have a consensus among the judges. If you want to write a tragedy, that is fine so long as romance is involved. It's okay if they break up at the end. It's okay if if one of the characters dies at the end. It's okay if we're sad. But just make sure that romance is the main part of the plot, even if we is sad. Yes.
What if they're already dead?
That just makes it a tragedy in advance. It's a tragedy from the start, but it still can be romantic. Um, no, I seriously, it still can be romantic. It's like this isn't romantic per se, but it's a great example of it. It's like the one day where Uncle Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender is celebrating his son's birthday, where it's like we all know he's already dead, and yet we're like this day is so wholesome and so sweet still because of the fact that we know how much he loves his kid. And so that kind of vibe is all I'm saying. You need to include the in this case romance, but in that case love of his son throughout the plot, even if we know that at the end they're still dead and it's still sad. So, um, but yes, if you have any other further questions, please feel free to ask me, and I will ask me and my round table of judges, and we will make a verdict if you are like, I'm really unsure about this specific aspect. Then in March, we are going to have a new contest. It is going to be the spring contest. fantasy themed. It's going to be write your own myth slash reason for spring. So, with that being said, it has to be fantasy. Does it have to be your own fantasy? Not necessarily, but it does have to be your own original myth. So, like, even if you came up with your own original myth for springtime here on Earth, that's fine. Or if you want to come up with some sort of original spring myth that takes place in modern day, that's fine. But if you want to do your own original myth for your own original world, that's also great. The main issue is just I don't want you being like Hades and Persephone, but I changed their names to Henry and Penelope. Like, no, no, please don't do that. The whole point of original is not that. I mean, you're welcome to do it, but know that you will be docked a severe amount of points in the originality category because we asked for your own original stuff. I'm going to turn off the video now, and then we will continue to write. Feel free to ask other questions.